Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Energy News Beat podcast. My name's Stu Turley, President and CEO of the Sandstone Group. I got Jerry James here, and we are absolutely ready for a wonderful discussion on U.S. industrial expansion, national security, and grid reliability. And we've had a heck of a talk getting in here. How are you today?
Good. Appreciate you inviting us today.
I'll tell you what, we just released out on the day we're recording this, we released out a young man you happen to know, Nathan Lord. I'll tell you what, that was a heck of a podcast.
Nathan does a wonderful job explaining the advantages of building industrial facilities in Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania.
I'll tell you, I'm going to brag on myself for half a second. You know, since my wife, we've been married 40 years, I have to brag because she won't brag on me. We released it this morning and he already got a big call. That's pretty cool.
He did. Somebody wanting him to solve their problems. I'm not sure, he may have to point to somebody else to solve their problems, but he got immediate response.
Isn't that fantastic? I absolutely love it. But well, tell us a little bit about what you do, Jerry, as we get rolling and getting ready to solve these problems, because we have got a huge list of national security issues to talk about.
So I'm a petroleum engineer. I got into business 50 years ago, so I've been doing this just a little bit. But not only being a petroleum engineer, but I'm kind of a student of history and a little bit of energy history. Not an expert, but enough to realize that when you look at things, you can learn a lot by looking at the past. And because of that, and I've been fortunate, did fairly well on my business side. I volunteer for some groups on like energy education things or research like with Shale, Crescent, USA, because I'm based here now in Marietta, Ohio, even though I've worked offshore Louisiana, I've worked in Texas, and I worked out west in Wyoming and stuff like that. So I've worked a few places and kind of try to bring all that experience and just see what we can help people understand on the energy side.
Well, let's go ahead and get rolling into some of your material here. And that is that you were talking about China before we got rolling in here. Right. And what are you talking about on this one?
Well, you know, when you look at this slide, and I got to give credit to a group that put this together, I think it makes a great point. You know, when you look back through history, most people don't realize, but we really invented the modern energy business, whether it's oil and gas or electricity. And so for the first over 100 homes, 150 years, we led in electricity production. But if you look at this slide and you follow the red line, that's China. Well, 10 years ago, China passed us in electricity production, and now they produce 2.5 times more electricity than we do. Well, why are we discussing electricity? We'll get into the connection between it and natural gas in a little bit. But you hear quite a bit right now that we've got to expand AI. Well, before you can win the AI race, you first have to win the electricity race. And what most people miss is if you're going to win the electricity race, you first got to win the fuel supply race, which for the next decade is going to be natural gas. So we've got to catch up with China. When you talk to people in DC, they view this as a national security issue. They view AI as the next big opportunity, both militarily and industrial. And you can see how far we're behind China on electricity generation. I should say one of the reasons we're behind is we've taken our eye off the reliability and affordability ball. China now burns half of the coal in the world is burnt in China. So they've grown their grid. It's nuts. And while we focused strictly in the last 4 years, you know, we focused merely on CO2 reduction. But if you look at CO2, and if that really is what concerns you, all the CO2, all the growth in CO2 in the world now is coming from Asia. Asia is 2/3 of the CO2 production in the world. In the United States, we're only 12% of the CO2 percent.
You know, Jerry, the Great Wall of China does not keep smog and pollution in China.
That's right. Does it? So we've got to if we're going to win the reindustrialization, if we're going to win the AI race, we've got to first focus on the energy solutions.
Well, your next slide here talks about what the DOE says.
Right. So we've got China over there with 2.5 times more energy production, electricity production than we do. But the DOE just came out with a study a couple months ago that said that if we don't do anything on our current path, we could be looking at a 100-fold increase in blackouts by 2030. And your viewers in Texas know how that was because of 2022. The blackout down there was severe. I think it was like $200 billion in damage.
Right.
And over 200 people were killed. So these blackouts are real serious things on the grid. If you notice, if we can keep our low growth on, in other words, most of that's coal, if we can keep our existing coal running, stuff like that, we can cut that down to 34-fold. That's still a huge increase.
Right.
So look at the current administration taking a lot of criticism, maybe for keeping the existing grid facilities on. That's why they're trying to keep the birds.
Oh, what's wrong with keeping the lights on?
I know.
And so we're going to roll to the next one here and go roll here.
Let's go right to here. Let's just stop right here, because one of the things we're going to talk about is, you'll hear from me, is don't break the grid. Whatever you do, don't break the grid. And Texas ran that experiment for us, and it was a very, very difficult experiment.
Right.
You know, $200 billion, we could pretty well fix most of the problems on the grid with most $200 billion. And think about that. It was just for not having electricity for 1 week. So what I'm looking at here, this goes back to my history, though, and this is the 1970s, which is why I became a petroleum engineer. It was the only thing in the 70s you could get a job was in petroleum engineering. Otherwise, there was no work at all. So most people remember the top picture, and that shows the gasoline shortage, and you could only buy 10 gallons of gas at a time for customer. And a lot of times that was only every other day or every third day.
Right.
And I remember I turned 16 when the gasoline shortage hits, and I had a 1967 Firebird convertible, got 10 or 12 miles a gallon. I had a girlfriend who's my wife now, but lived 10 or 12 miles away. So you do the math on how difficult that was for me to get gasoline to get out to see her. That was the trouble for a 16-year-old young boy. But what most people miss is the bottom headline from an Ohio newspaper. And this is the winter of 1977, which was extremely difficult. I mean, it was a long winter. And what it says on the natural gas side, large users to lose 85% of Columbia Gas, that's the utility up there, supply starting February 1st. So that means large industrial users like the Ford Motor Company, General Electric, General Motors, Libby Owens Ford glassmaker, Owens Corning, all these people, they lost their gas supply. Well, these things were caused by two totally different problems, and they happened at the same time, so a lot of people get confused. The first one, the gas shortage, was caused because U.S. oil and gas production peaks in the early 1970s. Because we supported Israel in a war in the Mideast, there's always wars in the Mideast, that the Arabs cut the oil supply off to us in 1973. What caused the natural gas shortage was, again, U.S. production peaks in the early 1970s and starts to decline. But that was caused by government regulations. States like Texas and Louisiana had plenty of natural gas. Us up here in the upper Midwest, where I grew up in Ohio, we got supply cut off. This is what starts what's called the Rust Belt, was this issue of having gas cut off. And the reason I bring this up to everybody is, A, I don't want this to ever happen again. But what happens 50 years ago, as we go through the talk here, you're going to see reverberate down to what's going on today, because dramatically the demand for electricity starts to decline at this point. The demand for natural gas starts to decline at this point for industrial gas.
Right.
And you'll see that played out in what probably is going to put pressure on our grid today if we don't fix it quick enough. But if we don't fix it quick enough, we can have these problems. And I think a lot of people miss that.
You know, and energy security starts at home. And Nathan brought up a great point on his podcast the other day that would release today. Wow, what a time warp I'm in. Energy growth and economics comes from exporting finished goods. And I think that is an important point. You're now talking about where to build the factories is next to the power source.
That's right. If you want speed to market, if you want to cut the cost of manufacturing, it's interesting, Nathan, and this is a great one here of jobs. And Nathan, to follow Nathan's point, we'll go to this one, is what you learn is cost of building a plant is pretty much the same everywhere. Cost of operating a plant is pretty much the same everywhere. What really drives particularly energy intensive manufacturing, which will also drive AI, because that's energy intensive manufacturing,
right,
is the cost that you pay. It's the cost you pay for your fuel, and your fuel is largely driven by what's your transportation cost to get it in the front door. And so this, I think, is something to learn. What you see here, though, Nathan, during the middle of COVID, he stayed out of pool halls, and he actually worked on this little chart. If you look at the blue bar, that's combined U.S. oil and gas production. If you look at the gray bars in the back, that's U.S. manufacturing jobs. So what you see is we start in post-World War II because most things are relevant in post-World War II.
Right.
What you see when people talk about the great times in Americas in 50s and 60s and in the early 70s, what you see is U.S. oil and gas production increased at the same time. You see the blue bar going up there on the left.
Wow.
What you also see, if you look behind it, you see the gray bars going up. Those are U.S. manufacturing jobs. And you got to realize that the United States in the Industrial Revolution are the exact same age. We all start in the late 1700s. So from the late 1700s until the mid 1970s, U.S. manufacturing jobs went up and down, but more or less the trend was up. And the reason is you're going to run manufacturing, you need energy. You need energy to run the plant. There are 6,000 products made from oil and gas, and so you need it for molecules. You see what happens when U.S. oil and gas production peaks and starts to decline there in the mid 1970s. You see that first drop.
Yep.
What you see is right behind it is U.S. manufacturing jobs peak and start to decline. I mentioned earlier, this is what makes my area become the Rust Belt.
Wow.
And you see that it continues. U.S. manufacturing jobs continue to decline. And you see what happens in 2000 when Bill Clinton lets China into the World Trade Organization. And there's another trade representative for the first Trump administration, and he's also from Ohio. And he calls that some kind of stupid when you let China in the World Trade Organization. And if you look at manufacturing jobs, look at they drop. They drop by a third.
Yep.
5 million manufacturing jobs right after that. Now, what's fascinating, and then the shale boom comes along around 2008, 2009, 2010. First, you see U.S. oil and gas production going back up. And it really, if you look at the increase, it's even greater in the post-World War II during the great economic times. That's why Nathan and a group formed in 3 states, Shale, Crescent, to try to bring U.S. manufacturing jobs back, because we knew that there could be great things for America behind that U.S. oil and gas boom. And if you look, you see U.S. manufacturing jobs starting to recover. We're even going to see more of it recover right now because the current administration has a focus on reindustrializing America. And the reason that it is, and people working in the oil field kind of know this anyhow, is it's the place where the average worker can make a really nice living for himself and support a family and everything else.
Right.
Well, U.S. manufacturing is the same thing. The average U.S. manufacturing job pays about $75,000 a year plus benefits, and it supports about 4 or 5 other jobs.
Right.
So this is why you want to keep it. So this is why we're excited as you see U.S. manufacturing jobs coming back. But there's something on this chart that I'm going to point out, and I alluded to it earlier.
Okay.
There's 2 points on this chart, and this will play out on our electric and natural gas grids. There's the peak in the late 1970s, and the decline starts. And there's the peak when we let China into the World Trade Organization.
Right.
Because of this, when we quit growing heavy industry, we quit growing a substantial part of our grids. And this is what worries me going forward now that we're reindustrializing and we've created a new industry called AI. And the best way to think of an AI as a new industry, I had a guy explain to me, Mark Mills, who's just fantastic. I think you've interviewed Mark in the past.
I've interviewed Mark, and he is one cool cat 2 times.
He's great. And I love Mark's quote. And he said, if you spend $1 billion building an AI center and $1 billion building an aluminum smelter, the AI center in the next 10 years will consume $300 million worth of electricity, and the aluminum smelter $400 million. So in my simple mind, I think of these AI centers like aluminum smelters, and I've lived around those. They are huge energy users.
Right.
So that's why I think of AI as another industrial load, as far as we on the energy supply business have to think about it.
I've got a crayon. I got to get my Big Chief tablet out here and some crayons, because in Texas we are looking at we have 180 named capacity nameplate on the grid right now, but we are looking at adding almost 270 of new demand gigawatt, and I'm just sitting there, the math is just exploding on how much demand is coming around the corner.
Oh, it is. And that's why I get a little concerned, and I think we're going to touch in a minute, of where we are historically on the grid and can we build fast enough?
Okay.
Because what you're going to see, and I want everybody to remember the late 70s, 1980, remember around 2000, because you're going to see subtleties on our natural gas and electric grid that, because we quit growing the industrial load, you'll see what it did to our grids. If we go on, and maybe we can go on to that slide. If you want to touch on this, I mentioned this and you liked it.
I loved it.
hopefully the public can see this on their screens. And I apologize. The light gray bars in the back are recessions. And the blue line in the front is the crude oil adjusted price for inflation. And the red circles I just put on to draw the major recessions. There's the mid 1970s, which was major, the late 1980s, 70s, early 1980s, the Great Recession, they call it, in 2008. And you see two minor recessions in between.
Right.
But what you notice, if everybody looks closely at that, if you can see it, and I apologize for the gray bars being light, is what you see is when you have an increase in the price of oil, you have a recession at the exact same point. At the exact same point. Now, I know everybody's been told everything's ran by interest rates, but I'll give you my simple-minded way, engineering mind thinking about this. My dad was a milkman. All my uncles were milkmen. So was my grandpa. Right. We were a blue-collar, middle-class, hardworking blue-collar family. But we were like most families. We lived pretty much paycheck to paycheck. So if you start to think about that, and 2/3 of Americans only have a few $100s in the bank, if all of a sudden you jack their price of energy up, they don't have any other solution other than to quit spending money on anything else. And voila, you got a recession. Mm-hmm. The reason I point this out to people is whatever you do, don't break the grid. Don't make it too expensive and don't make it unreliable, because you will break the entire economy. So energy, in my opinion, the economy really runs on affordable energy, is really what runs it. And I'll tell you who believes that too. Scott Bessent, who they appointed Treasury Secretary, he has 3 goals and he lists 3% goals. The first 2 are debt and deficit 3% goals. The third one, I've never seen a major official in the government ever say that. His third goal, and us in the oil and gas industry should have listened to this closely, because he apparently believes this too, is he wanted to increase energy production by 3 million barrels a day equivalent, which means it could be oil or it could be a combination of natural gas.
Right.
But the reason is, I always tell people that are in political office, if you can only do one thing, increase the supply of affordable energy, because the economy runs great when the energy is affordable. Because if you look at those long times when the blue line's decreasing, there's no recessions and the economy's booming, right?
Right. Wow.
And so if you think about that, if you only do one thing, and the reason is that affects the average working person, and it goes into all the products they make and all the food they consume and everything else.
This really explains President Trump's drill baby drill.
Absolutely.
I mean, this articulates drill baby drill, but the one problem is all my oil man friends get richer selling more oil under Democrat rule, because the oil prices are always higher under Democrat rule.
But they always vote Republican. Exactly. It's their logical mind gets in the way, doesn't it?
It does. And so, but this one's a follow along to that.
Yeah, this is a follow
up. I love this slide.
This is the same thing. Again, I apologize for the gray bars being kind of light in the background. Those are the recessions. What this now is the rate of change of energy prices. So what you see when the blue greenish bar spikes up, that's a fast rate of change. And what you see is virtually every recession is preceded by a spike in energy prices.
Wow.
And the one that a lot of your younger viewers will probably remember is the 2008 recession. And everybody says, well, the 2008 recession was caused by the bankers, right? Lending money they shouldn't have lent on things they shouldn't have lent money on. But I always remind people, what really started that was when oil went to $145 a barrel and gasoline went to $5.50 a gallon.
Yep.
The bankers got blamed for it. And I tell my bankers buddies, I'm glad you all got blamed for that one rather than us. But as Warren Buffett says, what happened to the bankers is the recession started because of high energy prices. And as Warren Buffett says, the bankers got caught swimming naked when the tide went out. and so that's what happened. So that gives one back in current times that maybe more people are familiar with.
We are about to see an update to this slide, and I'll tell you why. Because California is our largest economy in the United States, 4th in the world, and they've got their own self-imposed crisis, energy crisis going on with Gavin Newsom destroying and eviscerating the oil. They're importing 70% of their oil in California. and they have eviscerated everybody. They're going to start about $10 gasoline here real soon. And I'm wondering if he hadn't pushed the oil production too far.
Yeah. And most people don't realize it because, if you're younger, you don't think California was ever a major energy producer. But
They were.
California was always one of the top energy producing states in the top 5, probably since the beginning of the oil and gas industry. I mean, they date back to the 1800s, and Chevron their real name was Standard Oil of California. And so
I'd
when
forgotten
you look at it, that I agree 100% with you. The only thing that kind of saves California is they did 2 things.
What's
compared
that?
to, like, say, where I live. One, they deindustrialized. There used to be 1.6 million cars manufactured in California. It's another Mark Mills quote. And a
Wow.
few years ago, all they had left was a Tesla factory, and I'm not sure it's there anymore either.
Right.
So they deindustrialized. At the same time, they don't have to deal with severe cold weather like we do in the north. So that's why their move away from affordable energy kind of gets hidden, because they just basically got rid of their manufacturing base.
Here's a little tidbit for you, Jerry, and that is the coal consumption went up, even though they've killed all of the coal plant usage, because they're still producing a lot of cement in the area.
There you go.
And so all of a sudden I was trying to figure out why California's coal usage went up, and that crayon broke when I just laughing. I was like, come on, guys. You're bragging about not using coal. Have you got cement going anywhere?
There you go. I will tell everybody too, if you think the slide doesn't kind of go with what Stu and I are talking about, that's because we pulled these from a recent presentation I did. Really want to talk about the grid fragility.
Wow.
So there's some things going on here, and there's 7 changes on the grid that are just dramatic. So you go back to, well, how did I get started in the oil and gas industry? Remember I said I became a petroleum engineer during the energy shortages of the 70s, particularly the natural gas shortage. There really wasn't a shortage of natural gas then. It was that we could not deliver natural gas where we needed and the quantities we needed it. And that's what started to break the grid. Well, so let's look at what's going on in the grid now. If you remember earlier, I talked about there's 2 times I wanted you to think about. One time was 50 years ago, roughly, and that's when we had the first energy shortage and manufacturing jobs started down. The other was about 25 years ago when we let China into the World Trade Organization, and we lost a lot of our manufacturing jobs. So now all of a sudden we're back to the grid's got to grow. We got to grow, and it's got to grow dramatically. People are talking about in the next decade, we've got to increase natural gas production to meet all the new demands of AI, reindustrialization. Don't forget exports. We're talking about 30 to 40% more natural gas in the next 5 to 10 years. Ohio's got a study out there right now that says they're going to need 50% more electricity. And we're like the 5th or 6th largest economy in the United States, starting in 5 years. So this is dramatic growth that we've not seen because we've deindustrialized for 50 years, right? So this is the first time in 25 years we're seeing demand grow in electricity grid. We'll go into these detail. It's the first time in 50 years we're seeing industrial demand for natural gas growing. It's the first time ever we've got a new technology called artificial intelligence. It's the first time ever we've got a transition from coal to natural gas on the grid. It's the first time ever putting large quantities of intermittent generation on the grid. Now, the reason I put that down is that's a new source of demand at certain times natural gas has to meet. And when it can't meet it, Texas understands exactly what happens in 2022, in February 2022, when you can't meet that demand, right?
Oh, yeah.
And it's the first time ever we're exporting large volumes of natural gas. Now, what's really important, this is the first time we need substantial grid expansion, but who's going to make the required investment? Because what we did when the grid quit growing in the 1980s, we decided, well, we just need to deregulate everything. And, you can bid on power, you can bid on natural gas. Enron loved this thing. Matter of fact, it was 24 years yesterday, but Enron went bankrupt. And they loved all these kind of things. They promoted them.
Right.
But where we're at now, though, is we need to regrow the grid. And people always said, well, how did you used to grow the grid? Well, it used to be a regulated utility model, but the ratepayers, they went to the Public Utility Commission of your state. They got approval to build it. They got to do that. Well, in a lot of states, including Ohio, we don't really quite have that system anymore. Because why? Because we weren't really growing much. We were living off the legacy that our parents built.
Right.
And now we're kind of in. So we'll go through some of these individually, just so everybody realizes this isn't Jerry James's opinion. I'll show them the data. This is all from the Department of Energy mainly.
Sorry, let me back up. One of the things I interviewed Meredith Anglin, who authored Shorting the Grid. Love Meredith. Her Substack is the Electric Grandma, and I absolutely love that lady. She makes
a common sense.
She is a national treasure, and when you sit back and what you just said resonates so much to me. Because of her book, the grid balancing authorities have a real problem adding the wind and solar in because of the AC versus DC, direct current wind and solar, and then they have to be transformed into AC, asynchronous, in order to get onto the grid, and it don't match up.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then the other thing that everybody misses, and this is a good time to address that because I don't really talk about it, but you've raised up another thing. The other thing it's like they built a huge brand new power plant just north of my office here. It's just state of the art. It's one of the biggest in the country, natural gas fired. I think it's like 1,800 megawatts. It's a dandy.
Nice.
And I was talking to the guy that ran it one day, and he said, you know what, this was a couple of years ago, and this was the height of the ESG movement. He said, the real problem is, he says, I don't know who builds the next one of these. Because people don't think about it is, it used to be I'm old enough to remember Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan, who always quoted Milton Friedman, and Milton Friedman always said, the government is horrible about picking winners and losers, right? Well, people don't understand, when we went down this road of subsidizing and mandating wind and solar, and there's places that makes perfect sense to me that it would work. I live in the Ohio Valley. It wouldn't work here. It's one of the cloudiest places in the United States. But the point about it is my grandson's working on a solar array right here today. I speak. So I say this, and this shows you what he's doing. But what happens is the reliable power gets squeezed to the back of the line because nobody's mandating or subsidizing it. And so it's not only the AC/DC problem, it's also who stands up to build a for-profit power plant. When, and we're looking right here, and you can see the problem why this guy made the statement. And at the same time, somebody else is going to be put first in line. So if you look at this is total electricity demand. And the only thing I want to show people is a couple things on here. The first thing, if you look at 2025 or around 2000, you see electricity demand flatten. Well, you got to look at it. The other two, the green and the brown bars, are commercial and residential. They're just like that. But if you look at industrial, remember I said, look, 25 years ago, when we let China in the World Trade Organization, it starts to flatten in 1980. You can see that dip in 1980, but then you see it really flatten. So really the reason top line electricity hasn't grown, if you look at the chart and you look all the way back to 1950, it was growing until we deindustrialized. And we deindustrialized 2 times. First time when we created Rust Belt, second time we let China in the World Trade Organization. That flattened electricity demand. Everybody's been told, if you read the newspapers, they'll tell you, well, it's because we all put more efficient light bulbs in. Well, you can see, but that's not true because residential and commercial have continued to grow. Maybe not as fast, but they grew. The reason we went flat, and this gets back to why the guy said, who's going to build the next power plant? If you're into a flat electricity market and somebody's subsidizing somebody else to get part of that market, do you really want to go make a multi-billion-dollar investment in a flat market? It could be hard to make money. Well, now the electricity market's growing, but the point we try to make here is it's growing because the industrial processes are growing. And we're still going to have growth for the residential and commercial. So we're looking at something that really most people haven't experienced in a working career. They've never seen where we've had industrial load grow on the grid. Now, our parents would have thought, or at least your and I's parents, some of the younger viewers would be their grandparents. They were used to this, and this will play out a lot, and why we haven't had as many problems in the grid as we should have, because our parents were wonderful builders. They came in post-World War II, and post-World War II, they came home from World War II, and they were great. They built this grid 8-10-fold, both gas and electric. They actually overbuilt it. They had an incentive to overbuild it because they looked in the future and they could see growth.
Right.
we have lived off of what they built, and that is coming to an end.
We've lived off of what we built. Now, I'm old enough that my dad at 91, um, uh, he didn't have a indoor plumbing until he was 16, and he left for college at 17. He then went to World War II. I mean, he didn't go to World War II. He went to Vietnam right out of college, and he's the only one that made his way back home. All of his friends were shot down.
That's too bad.
The F-4 brought him home. Now,
yeah.
So you go from being, my granddad came to Oklahoma in a covered wagon. My dad didn't have indoor plumbing and barely had electricity, to now he's 91 and a day trader and having an absolute, that generation has seen a lot.
He's seen a lot. And I think we're going to see a lot now too. The change is coming. If you think about this, where I said earlier, Ohio recently did a very thorough study with some of the biggest companies in Ohio, and combined with McKinsey helped them on the study. And they're predicting the next 5 to 10 years, Ohio's electricity demand is going to grow 50%. And when we haven't seen much growth in a generation.
But
so
I'll tell you,
change.
I love Chris Wright. I just flat out just love that man. He has got his work cut out for him, because what you just said is the amount of growth right now. I mentioned that, I believe I mentioned this with Nathan on his podcast, and that was Bloomberg had written 230% increase in some of the areas near data centers back east, because they're government data centers and you're having to pay for the transmission lines to be brought in. That's getting dinged to the consumers.
Right.
So people are not going to be real thrilled with these things. Even in Tulsa, Oklahoma, they've had 100% increase in their electricity prices.
Right.
That's right. Now this is a big Democrat thing going, affordability. Right. Well, if we'd been growing the grid under the Biden, Obama, all the Bill Clinton, all of these other regimes of building the grid and stability and having a decent path forward, we wouldn't be where we are today.
You're absolutely right. And I'll go back to Ohio again, because Ohio's, most people think of as coal producing state. We are mainly a natural gas producing state today, I will say. But if you look at Ohio, one time at our peak, we had 23 or 24 coal plants. We're down to 4.
Wow.
So that gives you a real world example. Stu, you nailed it. We have had a misallocation of funds. And so how do we do this? You got to remember, and don't get to politics. These are just reality. When we deal with the energy business, it doesn't care about politics. It talks about reality. And I showed you, don't break the grid, because you can really mess things up.
Okay. Jerry, we got don't break the grid. And I hate to do a Sean Hannity and interrupt you, but we got don't break the grid. But we also have, I've always said, the grid says physics and fiscal responsibility matter. So we've got a new tagline thanks to Jerry James.
Well, I appreciate that.
Break the grid. And then the other one is still physics and fiscal responsibility matter to the grid. It could care less about anything else.
That's right. And so what we've done is we spent hundreds of billions of dollars just where you went, Stu. If we had spent that money on reliable and affordable electricity, we wouldn't have the affordability problem. You know, there was a guy named Henry Groppe. Did you ever know Henry out of Houston, Texas? Henry passed away last year, 2 years ago. Henry Groppe was great. He worked well into his 90s. And he starts in post-World War II. He was in Saudi Arabia in post-World War II. That shows you how long Henry Groppe. He eventually became an expert on pricing and consulting. And Henry Groppe taught me this on oil prices. For every 1% you move supply and demand, you will move the price of oil 10%. For every 1%, you will move the price 10%. So it goes to your affordability things.
Right.
Small changes in balancing the grid will have huge changes in prices. And so that's the thing of it is, if we would have spent that money overbuilding the grid, we might have reduced the price, because the more energy you provide, it's a commodity,
right?
Less expensive it gets. It's counterintuitive to what most people think. So, but you can see right here, this is what concerns me. We got to now grow this grid a bunch, and most people in their career have never done it. I want to go into the natural gas grid now. So the natural gas grid's a little easier to see. You see that happens in the 70s. Remember,
Right.
that was the time that we got into energy production in this country peaked and started to decline. We started losing manufacturing jobs. We lose them again in 2000. Again, I want to go back to industrial loads. So if you follow the brown now, and I apologize for the colors sometimes changing. If I could talk to DEI, I'd say, for love of God, keep your colors all the same. But anyhow, they produce good data though. So
let me get Chris on the phone here.
Yeah, say if he can ask him to do that for us. And so what you see that drop in industrial demand both times. So if you look at industrial demand, we really haven't changed much industrial demand on the natural gas grid in 50 years. And if you look at, because of efficiencies on the furnaces and everything like that, insulating houses, really residential, commercial haven't changed much at all. So now all of a sudden we're reindustrializing, and the estimate is coming out of the Department of Energy in the next decade, we could add 8 BCF a day of natural gas demand on the grid for industrial load because we're reindustrializing. And at the same time, what you see there is you see that the biggest chunk of growth on the natural gas grid was from electricity.
Right.
Okay. So, and again, what you'll see is our parents, again, did a wonderful job of overbuilding the grid. They even overbuilt it because they were looking always to the future. There just came out a report from the National Association of Utility Regulators, NARUC or something like that. Right. And they have a beautiful statement. The report just came out a week ago. And they talk about problems on the electric grid after the Texas event, after the event we had up here in 2022 in the Northeast on Christmas Eve, where we just about ran out of power too. So they got together for the last 2 years, and they've had the utilities, they've had the pipelines people, they've had the electric generating people, they've had the regulators all working together, and they just issued a report. It's a wonderful report. And basically what they make a statement at the very beginning of that says, the natural gas grid has done a wonderful job of backing up the electric grid, but it wasn't designed to back up the electric grid. And I told one of the guys that worked on the report, don't give us too much credit. The reason that it is because we deindustrialized. So that's why we had extra capacity on the grid. But I said, all that's coming to an end. And this is what starts to make me a little concerned with all this changes on the grid. Wow. Now we've got the electric grid growing. We've got the electric grid needing more natural gas. At the same time, we're reindustrializing. And there's a lot of places, we're like in Ohio here, we have one of the oldest utilities in the world is in Ohio because, the oil and gas industry, most of it starts in Ohio. And so, our natural gas utilities date back to late 1800s.
Right.
So one of the major utilities told me something in January of this year, which was cold, but I've seen a lot colder. They moved the most gas across their system they had ever in the history of the system. Think that through.
Man, this is some huge news. And then also, nat gas seems to be a cyclical process. I think cyclical is going away because of LNG, the faster demand. We're at 450 now on nat gas. I think that we are facing some great things for the oil and gas industry because of demand. I think that we're going to see that. And the rig counts in the United States have remained flat to growing in rig counts for nat gas.
Right. No, I agree with you. I think it looks a lot better in the last 15 years has looked for sure, because you can see right here, we're top line, we're growing in natural gas. And let's go ahead. You talked about exports too. I think maybe I can't reverse our next slide, or I'll get to it eventually. So this is the other thing I talked about AI, and this gives you an idea. This is the electricity consumption that they're projecting out of AI, and that's the blue line. So you see it swooping up there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So this is the first time ever. And so they're showing 350 billion, trying to get my right, that's probably billion, kilowatts. So, but the way I always do this, I can't do electricity. I'm a petroleum engineer. It's just hard for me. So what I always do is when somebody gives me a number in like megawatts,
right,
or gigawatts, we divide it by 7. So if there's going to be a 300 growth, we divide by 7, that's about 20 BCF a day.
Wow.
So you start to see that if these estimates come true, these are huge growth numbers. And it goes back to your point. So we've got all this other stuff going with gas, industrial loads growing, as you said, exports is growing, but this is going to grow too. If you go to the next slide, we may get to exports. We're going to get there eventually. This is coal. I just want to show everybody this because this explains to you why the gas grid's growing. And if you're from an area that's not coal generating, this may be a little confusing to you. Coal is gray on this graph. Natural gas is red. You can kind of ignore the rest of them. They aren't real players. But what you see is coal has shrunk dramatically in the last 20, 30 years, and natural gas has expanded dramatically.
For our podcast listeners, we're looking at a slide from the U.S. Industrial Expansion and National Security Grid Reliability slide deck, U.S. electric generation by source. But also, Jerry, look at the top two, solar and wind, as it comes in just a few years, a couple, let's say 2 decades, 20 years. We've spent trillions of dollars globally on wind and solar. Look at the amount that it has added in energy. Not that much.
Well, and this is on the electric grid, and that's where a lot of people I know get confused. And I don't blame them, and I kind of blame the people who write about this subject. They will talk about how much wind and solar progress they made on the electric grid. But remember, the real key is you don't want to break the grid, so you don't want to run out. And so on a peak day, the natural gas grid delivers 4 times more energy than the electric grid on a peak day.
Right.
So when you look at the electric grid, it's only a small fraction, and that doesn't include the petroleum grid. So it's only a small fraction of the whole thing. So that's the other thing to think about. This idea that we could replace the entire energy grid with wind and solar, it was never going to work.
No, it was mainstream marketing that failed.
Yep. So. And it's like you said, it's physics. So here's where we are. We're finally on the exports. So let's first start with something that if you've not followed the natural gas grid historically, let's go all the way back. We've originally supplied all of our natural gas from the United States. And then I said in the early 1970s, U.S. production peaks and starts to decline, but everybody notices when no one got cut off their gas. So how did we get the gas? We imported it mainly from Canada. And so for the next 30, 40 years, we imported from Canada. Well, something happened about 5 years ago. First time in history, we become a net exporter of natural gas. We had never substantially exported natural gas in the 150-year history of this industry. Wow. And you see it, you started right here in 15, LNG exports are 0. I heard last month they almost got to 20 BCF a day. And if you look going out to 2030, that's not that far away. And each one of these facilities are named facilities that are under construction or permitted. And you look at it, this number could go to 30 to 35. And this goes to exactly where you went. So let's go back and start kind of doing some math here, unless I did it in a slide. If this is going up 15 BCF a day, and we may need 15 BCF a day for the electric grid, and we may need 8 BCF a day for the natural gas industrial fuel, all of a sudden we're looking at 30, 40, maybe 50 BCF a day and 100, 105 BCF a day market.
Wow.
And remember, small shortages cause big problems. And big problems on price and big problems on reliability. This total change is the thing that concerns me, having started my career in a very, very bad time in the energy industry. And it was a good time for me, but it was bad for the country, is that I'm worried that we're starting to go here because we have not been building to this future. And wow. You start looking at the time frame. These are not long time frames. These are time frames by the end of the decade. This stuff's going to start happening. And just to give your listeners a little bit of an idea, let's take the Mountain Valley pipeline that got, which was the pipeline only going from West Virginia into Virginia is where it got stopped by litigation. That pipeline eventually took 7 years to build. Okay. I asked the guy that built the electric generating plant up here how long from idea to permit to build. He was almost 6 or 7 years. So wow. You start looking at some of these time frames. I tell everybody, the grid you want in the next decade, you have to order today. and we're not
Right.
making the orders. We are not making the orders.
Oh, and it's even worse than that when you take a look at the turbine wait
Yeah,
times
yeah,
now. You got to have cash in hand, and nuclear is not going to get here. I
no.
love nuclear. Believe me, I'm a nuclear fan. Yay, nuclear! But it is not here yet,
It's
and
always been the fuel of the future.
fuel of the future. I absolutely love it. Now,
Yeah,
I want to give nano nuclear a shout out because I'm working on, I've got a commitment from JU, the founder of nano nuclear. They've got 2 reactors approved that they are now moving forward on. They're building their plants so they can mass produce the micro reactors at the same time. That to me is brilliant because nuclear does not have the long term cash flow. They seem to have that fixed and they're bringing it in years instead of decades.
well,
So,
that's the problem. Can you bring it?
yep,
And what I tell everybody, though, the opportunity, because remember, there's an opportunity for growing the grid here too. I
yep,
don't want everybody to just think this is all negative. This is what I've been waiting on for my whole career to reindustrialize, so the average working person can make a living. Right? That's a
right.
great thing. We've created a new industry called AI that'll create more jobs for blue collar workers and stuff like that. Not as much as industrialization, but by the time you supply the fuel, you generate the electricity, you man the AI centers and stuff like that. But the
Yep,
point of it is all these opportunities are going to come before we can deploy nuclear at scale.
yep. Ding. Jerry,
And
let me ask this. I think Elon Musk put out just a little while ago. He's not calling me yet, but he just put out a little while ago that AI is going to cost a lot of people jobs. And when it happens, it's going to happen quick. And
right,
in the oil and gas space, the advances that are happening to AI in the oil and gas space is very impressive. And I think that we are losing a lot of office workers, but
right.
we still need guys on the rigs. We still need pipeliners. We need those badly. And in California, oh, speaking of California, they've lost all of the talent. So even if they did try to put out 2,000 permits or slow walk them, they don't have enough people.
Yep, I know. Well, Nathan, you talked to Nathan last week. Nathan's brother is a petroleum engineer, started his career with Chevron in California.
Right.
And this is probably about 5, 7 years ago. They called a company-wide meeting in California of the operations people, the engineers and the field workers, that type of stuff, people to actually do stuff. And there was like 250 in the room, and they asked them to raise their hands and ask them how many they thought their jobs would be there in 5 to 10 years. And there was only a handful of people raised their hands. And now he works back east now. So your comment on an anecdotal basis, your comment's spot on.
Wow. And if you can't figure it now, the other comment is, and I think that if you don't understand how to utilize AI, you will be replaced.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, anyway, that was fantastic.
Well, so this is really, we can skip through this. This was the Ohio study that I was talking about, is how much Ohio's grid's going to grow. And
Wow.
so this gets into, you see that starting in 2025, you show it going up to how much Ohio needs to grow in 5 years. What I want to show you is where you end up on the grass grid. If you kind of go through these slides, we won't drag everybody through the electric. Apologize. Let's go back just a little bit. Let's keep going. And I want to show everybody where this ends up. I'm trying to remember my study. It's been a few right here. Okay. This chart right here. So this is Ohio. And I'm using Ohio as a bellwether state. Now, they also showed PJM, which is the grid we're in the eastern United States, which runs from the East Coast through Pennsylvania, through Ohio, a little bit of Illinois, and a little bit of Michigan, that type. It's the largest grid in the United States. It's got dramatic growth projections in this study, too. So it says Ohio produces 5.5 BCF a day. We're like the 5th or 6th largest producer in the United States of natural gas. Luckily, we've got our 2 neighbors of West Virginia and Pennsylvania. That's really helpful. Our consumption, after 150 years of industrialization and people, we've got 11 million people, is 3.5 BCF a day. We net export 2. Not too bad. If you look at where we're going based on the study that the Ohio Business Roundtable conducted of their members, now these are industrial people.
Right.
where we need to have an additional 3 BCF a day to meet the new demand and replace retirements on our coal system and stuff like that.
For
So
our
think about
podcast listeners, BCF is
right,
billion cubic
feet. And
thing.
so
That's a
billion
lot.
cubic feet. So I always tell people, remember I said earlier, we're one of the oldest producing places in the United States, right? And when we have the oldest utilities probably in the world, it took us 150 years to get to 3.5. But you're telling me in the next 5 to 10 years, I've got to nearly double that? And
Pipelines,
what I
baby.
told them is, and they're taking this seriously. That's why they had us come up there and we spoke for just a couple hours on this one subject, which is why we're kind of skipping over some slides to the public. We don't want to bore them to death. But it just makes the idea how big this challenge is. The trouble is nobody's specifically telling the natural gas industry that you got to grow that much. The market signal is not being sent that you need to grow that much, because I tell everybody this, the wells I drilled today, they were a thought in somebody's mind 3 to 5 years ago. It's not something, it's not 3 to 5 days.
No.
The time you develop the prospect, you test it geologically, you acquire the acreage, you get the permits, you get the drilling contractors signed up. It's a 3 to 5 year process. So if you got to do this, the industry needs to know now. And this is really where a breakdown's occurring nationwide. And this is what really starts to worry me before about problems on the grid is this. The LNG guys are doing a great job of sending market signals. They're signing long-term contracts. Heck, Japan just bought two producers in the Haynesville. The country of Japan now owns 2 producers in the Haynesville.
And Saudi Arabia and Qatar are doing the same thing.
And so they're signing long-term contracts. They're even buying the gas. They're laying the pipelines. They're building the facilities. Okay. The electric industry, which is the next biggest demand chunk of the gas grid. And I'm not blaming the electric industry. This is part of the unintended consequences of deregulation that I mentioned that started back in the 80s. When we have independent electric companies like the one I described that's just north of me, they've got to bid every 15 minutes to get on the electric grid. That's how they get on. Every 15 minutes, they got to put a new bid in. Well, you don't want to go and sign a long-term contract with the natural gas fuel supply, because like right now, it's really cold out. If you sign a contract and the price drops because it turns warm, all of a sudden you won't win the bid because your gas price is too high. I'm not blaming them, but it's the reality of the market we set up in a deregulated market, that they can't make a long-term commitment for the fuel supply, or they can't make a long-term commitment for pipelines or for natural gas storage to back all this up.
I did not know that.
They own a short-term price spike. I talked to one electric guy and he says, well, we've got contracts that run out 2 years. And I said, well, that's great. And then I went back to show him the slide on the exports. I said, here's your competitors. They're getting ready to double in 5 years, and they're signing long-term contracts of 10 years or more, or they're buying the fuel itself. What are you going to do when that doubles? And I'm here to tell you, this was a major electric generator. He did not have an answer for that question.
To your point, Jerry, what happened in Germany is absolutely parallel to what we're talking about now. They had no contracts on nat gas.
Right.
None. They said, oh, there's plenty of gas. I can barely do a Putin imitation, let alone a German. Oh, lots of gas. Anyway, there's lots of gas. And that's what happened. Oh, one missing Nord Stream pipeline later and one more, and they have fallen off the deindustrialization bench totally.
Yep. The German, Nathan was in Germany. Again, Nathan was who Stu interviewed last week, and he goes around representing our region, trying to bring industrial manufacturing to Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania. He was in Germany, and he was explaining to the head of one of their industrial councils how much our energy advantage was. And just so if everybody didn't catch Nathan's talk, if Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania formed a country, we would be the 3rd largest natural gas producer in the world, only behind Russia and the rest of the United States total.
Wow.
Now, I like what the DOE, I told Nathan right before we got on, And as the DOE just came out with a study a couple of weeks ago, in which they divided the Appalachian Basin, which is core, it's Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and they then divided the Permian Basin, which is West Texas, New Mexico, and then they separated the Haynesville, which are the three major gas fields. Those three fields produce about 75% of all the natural gas in the United States come from three major basins. Anyhow, when the DOE did that, we moved up from third to second behind Russia because the rest of the United States got divided in half.
Wow.
So when Nathan explained that to him and he explained how low of it our price was here, the guy just said, I knew we had it bad. He said, and he had the German accent. I can't do it here. He goes, we're screwed.
Rut-row.
Because not only did they go the wrong direction, right?
Yeah.
They focused on CO2 reduction while the competitors in Asia were focused on energy growth.
Yeah. All the above.
Now they've got a problem with the United States.
Yeah. Unbelievable. This is an amazing, and I absolutely loved Nathan's comment. He says, God bless Texas, because they tell when the rest of the world looks at the United States, they think Texas produces all of the energy for the United States.
Right.
We tell everybody that, and that's what, shame on us. But, people need to know how prevalent the Marcellus and that is up in your area up there.
It is 35% of the natural gas today going to 50% in 10 years of U.S. natural gas is what the DOE says, Department of Energy.
Wow.
This right here, I just wanted to explain to the listeners the problem. We touched on this just a little bit a minute ago, Stu, is this is an example of LNG. So this is a new proposed pipeline to come into Ohio, pick up 2 billion cubic feet per day. Remember, we produce 5.5 billion, and take it on down to Louisiana. Now they're saying they may not take it that far. They may take it down into Tennessee and support data centers there. But what you see is this is an example of the LNG people making commitments.
It would make so much more sense to also carry these pipelines through New York and then off to the East Coast to export LNG to the Atlantic, and you would cut a lot of shipping down.
Right. Well, the other thing is, if you did that, you keep the lights from going out in New York. I may have a slide in here. What happens in New York doesn't have enough gas?
Yeah.
This is just our grid PJM, because I was doing this presentation for Ohioans.
Yep.
You can see here the states it covers. It's the largest grid. It has the largest industrial base in the United States. And we also have cold temperatures on top of that. And for the people who live in Texas in 2022, they understand what happens when you mix all these things and it gets cold, the grid can break, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so what I always tell people, you've got to fix it on PJM because it's 65 million people and it's got everything else mixed in. If we can't fix it on PJM, we can't fix it anywhere. So that's why we went a deep dive in PJM. I don't think your readers want to take that deep of a dive. So we'll just kind of gloss over these slides.
Okay. You want to keep going on those?
No, the only point I was going to make is if you had the one chart, if we get to there, you mentioned what Ohio stacks up. If you keep going, okay. Can we keep going? Here we go. And for anybody that missed this in Nathan's presentation, this was interesting. Nathan just released a study in which he said, when one of the first research we did almost 10 years ago, and I mentioned earlier, if Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania formed a country, if anybody knows anything about the three states, Pennsylvania would consider giving Philadelphia to New Jersey. We might talk with the rest of Pennsylvania about that. We could even put up with Steelers fans. But if we did three states, we would be the third largest producer of natural gas in the world. Now, what's interesting is you hear Donald Trump, and he always says bombastic things. He's Donald Trump, right?
Yeah.
But he talks about Canada. Well, Canada is, I think, number 4 on the list.
Yeah.
Right. We produce in Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, we produce twice as much natural gas as the entire country of Canada.
Wow.
We produce 50% more natural gas than China.
And you know what's sad is Canada could produce so much more. I mean, Canada could add. I love Canada. absolutely love Canada, and especially Alberta, the uh, Quebec and that area. Let it go to Europe. Just let it go away. We'll
Yeah.
take Alberta, bring them in as the 51st state, and Greenland. I'm all in. Let's do that.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So it just goes to say. Now, I will say one thing politically on this one. If you look at the last country on that list of the top 10 countries in the world, and that's 70% of all the natural gas in the world, and you got to understand natural gas is the industrial fuel. It's what keeps the lights on. It's what keeps, it's the big part of making the 6,000 products. A lot of
Right.
things you wear, carpet you stand on probably starts life as natural gas molecule. The last one on there, I believe, is it Norway still? Is that number the last one? I can't quite read it there.
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're growing. And Norway 4 years ago, when we started the podcast, I believe 5 years ago.
Yeah.
4 years ago, Norway said we're getting out of all fossil fuels. Now they're putting in $3.5 billion expansion into the North Sea to do more drilling.
There you go. And it's for everybody understands Norway kind of owns unlike the United States, they kind of own the country kind of owns some of the producers over there or has an interest in the field.
You bet.
But the other reason I tell everybody is why we shouldn't listen to Western Europeans on our energy policy is when you're last on the list and you're only 2 or 3% of the world's natural gas supply.
Right.
I'm just not questioning their motives, but maybe the reason they really wanted the United States to get rid of all of its oil and gas production is how are they going to compete?
Oh, that's a good question.
We shouldn't listen to people who don't have anything, right? It's easy to say you're going to do away with something if you don't have it.
Like politicians.
Yeah.
I'm not a politician fan anymore. I'll tell you. I think.
Well, I've got some good friends that are politicians, and I always, and in all seriousness to them, they have a very difficult job because.
Can I ask a personal question?
Yeah.
If you have politicians that are good people, they're probably not originally politicians.
That's true. A lot of them weren't.
I just thought I'd say because there are. Donald Trump was not a politician to begin with. And so I think that the politician, and even take J.D. Vance, he is not a politician originally. He was a Marine. I consider that a thing. Even Vivek Ramaswamy, he was actually a huge businessman.
And so was JD before he got into it too. He was into investment banking, stuff like that too. He was just elected. I mean, I think he just turned 40 and he was elected 2 years ago for the first time. So his first 38 years of life, he had a normal life, let's say.
Oh, I'll tell you what, I think J.D. Vance is a hoot. And I love the fact that J.D. Vance has embraced the memology. And when our Congress, the Democrats did the Schumer shutdown, I absolutely loved President Trump's sombreros and everything else. If you can't have a little bit of fun, and they didn't think that was real funny. I'm sorry. I thought it was kind of funny.
Well, Stu, you're as a broadcaster, you're in good company because one of the big political writers a generation ago was George Will. Remember George Will? He would do a lot of columns on all talk show. George Will said what made Ronald Reagan a different president was he had an adult life before he was in politics.
I love that, an adult life.
That's the same thing you just said, right?
Yeah, but again, I'm mentally 12, so I just like oops. But anyway, well, tell us, Jerry, how people can find you. You're Jerry James, and how do people?
I have a day job. I do all of this. We do have a project we're working on. That's why my team's researched a lot of this. But a day job, I'm president of Artex Oil Company in Marietta, Ohio, is where I'm out of. And so, they can text me or email. They can email me. It's jjames at Artex. That's ARTEX oil.com. So we do this. I do this mainly as volunteer work because my dad, I mentioned earlier, my dad was a milkman. All my uncles were milkmen. My grandpa was a milkman. These are guys that got up 3 o'clock in the morning and went to work my whole life. And so, but then when they got home at 3 or 4 o'clock in the evening, after they worked 12 hours, and now that I'm old, I don't know how they did this. You would see them down at the ball diamonds, working on the Little League ball diamonds or helping build a Little League football field and stuff like that. And so when I got to the point in life where I could give back, I thought, well, how can I give back? And I thought, well, really, a lot of this is trying to inform people on the energy business, because the last thing we want, I go back to where we started. I never want to see the 1970s repeat themselves. We had something we called the misery index back there. And just so everybody knows how miserable it was. Stu's laughing. He remembers it. People talk about inflation now, and they talk about interest rates now, and they talk about unemployment now, which are all in the low single digits. We had in the late 70s, we had double-digit unemployment, double-digit interest rates, and double-digit inflation all at the same time. The first house I bought in Ohio had a 15.5% mortgage with a 20.5% cap because it was variable. So I bought a house on credit card interest rates. And the only reason I got a job, I was lucky because I became a petroleum engineer. But you just couldn't hardly keep up. I'm really worried about this country where it's at today. We can not go back to, we have a system where we fail. And with all the energy we produce, we shouldn't fail. But it's not how much energy produced. It's really boils down to where I ended that talk is it readily available? And this gets into nuclear versus gas. Gas is going to be here first. Is it scalable? Likely it's scalable. Is it affordable? It's the cheapest hydrocarbon molecule in the world is natural gas in the United States.
Right.
And is it reliable? And it is. And so we've got all this opportunity. The question is whether we've got the political will to get the infrastructure built where we need it, when we need it, because that's really how energy matters.
It's going to take internal fortitude of Jerry Nadler's stature in order to get this done. And I'm being making a joke there, but we are going to need incredible fortitude of internal systems to get those pipelines done. We need pipelines badly. We need manufacturing badly.
We do. I will give you one thought that we have is we turn that on the head, because I worry about whether we can build enough pipelines fast enough, because the opportunity is going to be here really quick, right? It is, and I might have mentioned this one time, is there's the old adage, if you can't move the mountain to Muhammad, you got to move Muhammad to the mountain. Well, there's a mountain of energy in Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and in Texas, and in Louisiana. That's about 75 or 80% of the natural gas we produce in this country.
Right.
So if you look at that, and this is already starting to happen, it wasn't happening a year or two ago when we used to preach this, it's happening more today, is if we build the demand on top of fuel supply, would dramatically cut the time that it takes to get this done, would dramatically cut the cost, and will dramatically cut the friction we create with the public, because nobody wants a major pipeline or a major electric line laid through his property. So we can dramatically cut all of that. But I think it's going to take, it's interesting, the Texans are doing a much better job. They're doing a job in Louisiana. But even in Ohio, we've got a lot of data centers. We're like on the top of the list on data centers. But interesting, most of the gas is from Eastern Ohio. Matter of fact, if you look at where Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania run together, 25% within a 50-mile radius of all the gas produced in the United States is where those three states meet. But there's very little data centers been built in that region at all. And it should be where they build it.
Let's go build a data center.
There you go. Yeah.
That is so cool. Well, thank you so much, Jerry. I hope this is the first of multiple conversations, because I really am floored by how well you articulated a lot of these problems out there, Jerry. You did great.
Well, as long as I didn't depress anybody, my goal is not to depress them. You always remember, the goal at the end of the line is the jobs. If you always keep that as the mind of how to really help you. My dad used to tell me the best way to help me is help him get a good job.
Absolutely. And I think when my first interview with Nathan and my first exposure to the Crescent Shale USA organization is critical. And I want to do what I can to help get that story out there.
We appreciate that.
This is a huge deal, because if we don't industrialize, we will end up like the UK, EU, and Canada.
That's
And
right.
I firmly believe that we're approaching new trading blocks, and those new trading blocks are going to be everybody that has the all above energy policies not tied to net zero. Those are going to be the new trading blocks of India, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Russia, the United States are all going to be in these new trading blocks coming around the corner because the war is going to end. I'm very positive that it's going to end.
That's right.
So anyway, but with that, again, Jerry, thank you very much for
Well, thank
stopping
you,
by
and
the
thank your
podcast.
listeners for you taking the time to listen.
And we'll have all your contact information in the show notes. So,
Okay, thank you.